World War II combat cameras.
Subscribe for daily content. Support this channel so it can grow. Join my Patreon to see exclusive videos and photos.
Please follow me on Twitter for even more quick updates.
Axis and Allied war correspondence during service. The Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU, in Northwest Europe 1944–1945. The British Army was unprepared for the demands of official war photography and, as the best cameras of the time were of German manufacture, they had to buy them from whatever sources they could find and also appealed for donations. 35mm cameras were still viewed with suspicion, with 120 film size being the most common format. Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU. Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU. AFPU cameraman Sergeant J. H. Goddard uses a turret-lensed IMO camera to film a German military direction sign attached to the only part of the Hotel Moderna left standing amidst the ruins of Caen, 10 July 1944. Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU. Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU. Army Film and Photographic Unit, AFPU. AFPU photographer Sergeant Norman Midgley in his Jeep, with his official issue Super Iconta camera at the ready, during the assault on Caen, 24 July 1944. Sergeant Midgley was a staff photographer with the Daily Express newspaper in Manchester before joining the AFPU. Sergeant George Laws of No. 5 AFPU, first cameraman ashore on D-Day. He is using a Zeiss Super Iconta. The Super Iconta models 530/16 and 532/16 were the standard cameras issued to the AFPU. They were described in the AFPU manual as having been proved to be the best and handiest in action. By contrast, Bert Hardy commented, "I can only think that it was adopted by the Army in order to make life difficult for us." Hardy, p.188. Rangefinder camera with f3.5 or f2.8 80mm lens with Comper shutter to 1/400. Separate rangefinder and viewfinder 530/16, or combined 532/16. 120mm size film, 11 exposures. Used by Sergeant Peter Norris of AFPU during the Normandy campaign. Later model with combined viewfinder and rangefinder. Used by Jim Mapham to take the famous images of the D-Day landings on Swords Beach. Also used by Bert Hardy. This combat footage is from a group of films of British and Canadian troops landing on the Normandy beaches on D-Day. These films only exist because a small number of cameramen risked their lives to film them, some going in with the very first wave. Rolleiflex Automat 1937–1939 twin-lens reflex camera. In AFPU service, intended to cover, feature sets, rather than rapid action. Comper shutter to 1/400. Tesser f 3.5 75mm lens 120mm film, 12 exposures. A Rolleiflex was used by Robert Capa from 1943 to supplement his contacts, on the insistence of Life magazine. It was used to photograph images of wounded troops on board ship on return from the first wave of D-Day landings. Lee Miller also used a Rolleiflex during World War II. It was even used from 1943 by the Hidden Camera group of the Dutch resistance. An earlier model of the Rolleiflex was used in the Spanish Civil War by Gerda Taro from 1936–1937 and by David Chim Seymour during 1936 to 1938, alongside his Leica. Kodak Medalist I 1941 Heavy and Awkward Rangefinder Camera, the professional's heavy tank. Kodak Super Modich Shutter to 1/400 f3.5 100 meters lens. Unusually for pre-war cameras, the lens was coated. 620 mm film 8 exposures. The AFPU manual stated that this camera should only be handled by an experienced photographer. It was mainly used for color and infrared photography. Used by AFPU photographer Captain Edward Dine to photograph King George VI and Field Marshal Montgomery in 1944. Voigtlander Bessa I 1931–1949. This was the most basic camera of the cameras issued to the AFPU. Although the Bessa was also available as a rangefinder model, the type illustrated in the AFPU manual relies on estimating focusing distance and adjusting using the mount on the lens. Comper Shutter to 1/400 f4.5 105 meters lens. 120 mm film taking 8 or 16 half-sized exposures, with mask. AFPU manual takes care to note that the lens should not be cleaned with a handkerchief. Ensign Commando 1945–1950 civilian version illustrated 1947. The original military version of the Ensign Commando was issued to some official cameramen at the end of World War II. The main difference to the civilian version released in 1946 was in having a planar trim and different designs of rewind knob. f3.5 75 mm lens. 0.120 mm film size. Zeiss Contax II 1936–45, the first camera with a combined range viewfinder. It was able to use interchangeable lenses and had an accessory shoe for flash. Speed to 1/1250th. Interchangeable lenses, standard as 50 mm sonar, f2 or f1.5. 35 mm film in cassettes. Favored by many professional photographers of the time, notably Robert Capa, Bert Hardy, and Lee Miller. The AFPU allowed Hardy to use his contacts, but refused to pay the costs of servicing it. Prior to the D-Day landings of June 1944, selected officers and men of 30 Assault Unit were given photographic training by the AFPU and were issued with Contax II cameras. Their task was to move ahead of the Allied armies and capture key intelligence targets. Leica IIIA 1935–1940 regarded as less rugged and more difficult to load than the Contax II but lighter. Interchangeable lenses, standard for was the 50 mm f2 Sumar. 35 mm film in cassettes. In September 1942, 30 Assault Unit requested 5 Leicas, preferably with f2 lenses, from the Admiralty. It is not clear if they were received. Used by British war correspondent George Roger for Life magazine. Sergeant Sandy McLaren of AFPU used his personal Leica alongside a Super Ikonta until temporary capture by the Afrika Korps. Many Leicas were liberated by the AFPU teams in Germany and used as backup cameras to the official issue. A Leica IIIA was used by Eisenstadt to take the classic 1945 VJ night photograph in New York Times Square. Kodak 35, military, 1941–1943. The military version of the first 35 mm camera produced by Kodak in 1938. Most of the first production was bought by the U.S. military. Basic 35 mm camera without rangefinder. f4.5 51mm lens. An unattributed photograph of a museum collection of SOE equipment shows the civilian version of the Kodak 35. Argus C3, the brick, 1939 to 1966 35mm camera with a fixed lens. Introduced in 1939. Issued to GI soldier photographers, GIs gave cameras to record unit histories. Most famously used by Tony Vaccaro to record the 83rd Infantry Division in Europe 1944–1945. Graflex Speed Graphic, Anniversary, 1940–1947. The American Speed Graphic half-plate camera was the standard press camera of the 1930s and 1940s. 35mm cameras were considered toys by some editors until the pioneering work of photographers such as Bert Hardy. Interchangeable lenses. Speeds 1 second to 1/1000. Film size 3–1/4, x 4–1/4, or 4 inches by 5 inches single sheets. The Anniversary model was manufactured in 1940 to 1947 and was also produced in a military version for the U.S. forces. It was not suited to action shots, but the U.S. produced a military version and was the camera used by Rosenthal to take the iconic image of the raising of the U.S. flag on Iwo Jima. Kodak Retina 2 1936–1939 Illustrated Type 142, 1937–9. Speeds to 1/500. f2.8 50mm Schneider Xenon lens. Compact. Relatively cheap. 35mm rangefinder camera made in Germany by Kodak AG. Its small size and well-protected lens meant it was ideal for slipping into a coat pocket. CIS agent Oluf Reed Olsen used a Retina Kodak to photograph German airfields around Oslo from April to late August 1940. He was captured whilst photographing the DF equipment of a crashed Heinkel 3, but fortunately managed to escape. The exact model of the camera is not known, but the rangefinder variant would clearly have been the most convenient. SOE also purchased a Retina IIA in Stockholm. Minox Riga sub-miniature 1937–1943 sub-miniature camera for 8x11mm exposures on 9.5mm film in special cassettes. The classic spy camera. The original model was designed by Walter Zapp and was manufactured at the VEP factory in Riga, Latvia, from 1937 to 1943. Before the war, a number were purchased by British intelligence. Used by CIS and SOE agents, including by SOE in France 1943, and Greece 1944. Ensign Midget 1934–1940 The Ensign Company seized upon the marketing opportunity afforded by the outbreak of war and advertised their well-established midget camera to troops as a remarkable wartime camera. It goes into a tunic pocket, with room to spare. The company also exhorted civilians to keep an Ensign Midget wartime diary. Ensign 1940 catalog. The camera did, however, go out of production in 1940. There are isolated references to soldiers in the 8th Army and in New Guinea using an Ensign Midget camera. It uses an E10 roll film to produce a negative 3.5 by 4.5 centimeters. AGFA Box 45-1938-1942 Most of the simple box cameras used, unofficially, by troops in WW2 are only described generically as box brownies. Many were the common Kodak models, but other brands included the popular AGFA range. The AGFA 45 is illustrated. It is a simple metal box with a single-element meniscus f11 lens and 2-speed shutter, 1/30th NB. It uses 120mm film producing 6 cm by 9 cm prints. An AGFA Box 44 was carried by Heinz Louis on the Kindertransport from Germany to France in 1939. An otherwise unnamed AGFA camera was used by Sergeant Arthur Ward, RAW, in Italy during 1944. An AGFA box camera was also carried by a German Tiger tank unit in Russia, 1944. An AGFA 45 was used by Sergeant Francis Lawrence, Australian Ordnance Corps, who served from 1943 to 1961 in the Far East. Kine Exacta JG Dresden 1936 to 1948, Model 2/3, 1937 to 8 export version, Schneider Xenon f250 mm lens. Speeds to 1/1000. 35 mm film size. One of the first cameras to include built-in flash synchronization. Apparently prized by U.S. submarine commanders for taking pictures through periscopes. This was a common camera used by German photojournalists in World War II, along with Leica IIIA. Not all of the members of the German photographic units were committed Nazis. Joe Heidecker (1916–1997) was a writer and anti-Nazi who had been conscripted into a propaganda unit of the German army. With his Exacta, he managed to take illegal photographs of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941–1942. His family and friends later had to hide the negatives from the Gestapo.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a comment, like and subscribe. Support the channel so I can bring you more content. Thank you again.
Thank you to all my Patreons for making those videos possible. You are awesome.